Okay, this screen task is meant for those of us that are going to be assisting in constructing the IEP accommodations forms that we'll be using to not only enter but also track and analyze data for our students with IEPs or our students with 504 plans. So there's several steps in the process to create this form, and I want to make sure that we all follow the exact same process so that the forms are all uniform across all grade levels when we're doing this process. So we'll go ahead and get started. The very first step is to open up your internet browser, and whether or not that's Firefox, Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, it doesn't matter, but essentially what you need to do is just get to your email. So what I'm going to do is just use Google Chrome myself, and this needs to be a Gmail account that we're going to use. And in our case, specifically here at Vaughan, we want to use our Vaughan Charter email account because, again, we will eventually be sharing these documents within our own network. And we don't want to share these with anybody on our personal network. So I'm going to go ahead and get to my Vaughan Charter email, sign in, and what you'll notice is, the same screen should pop up where you generally check your email. Once you are into that screen, which mine's loading right now, you'll notice on the very top of your screen a toolbar with several options. Mail being one of them, documents, calendar, sites. The one that we want to go to develop this form is the Documents button. And so once we go to this link and click on Documents, you'll be taken to a screen where generally for most of us, even if we're not too familiar with Google Forms, have a library of documents that have been shared with us. And so again, in going through and taking a look at this series of documents, we haven't created the one we want yet. And so what we are going to do each time that we create a new document for one of our IEP students is go to the Create button right over here. And what you'll want to do once you push on that is take a look at all the options you have. So again, you can either create a document, a presentation, a spreadsheet, and in our case, for this purpose, what we want to do each time is create a new form. And so what we'll do is click on the Form button, and a template will pop up for us. Now, we have a lot of things that need to be accomplished in this form. So one of the things, and ignore that step I just made there, I was just cleaning this up for demonstration purposes. The first thing we need to do is put in each student's name into the clean accommodation form. So again, for legal purposes, what we're going to do is only provide the first name and the last initial. So if the student's name was Jane Doe, we would put in Jane D. And that would be it. We wouldn't put anything else in for that student's name, again, for confidentiality. In the box where it says you can include any text or info that will help people fill this out, well, what we want to put here is the preferred modality. And so again, that's going to be different for each student. So this is something where you would put in whether or not the student is a kinesthetic learner, an audio-visual learner, a visual learner. We'll go ahead and put in the student, prefers visual learning. Again, this is according to their IEP document. So this is the preferred modality. Now, when we come down here, I'm going to explain some features that we see, but what you'll notice in this section here is that you have a question title, you have help text, and you have a question type with a drop-down menu. Over here on the right side, you have three buttons, two of which you'll be using frequently in developing this document. The first one, which looks like a pencil, is the edit option. We'll be using that very frequently. The one with two small squares overlapping, that is the duplicate button. You'll want to push that button each time that you have to create a new section of the document. And then if you, for some reason, make a mistake and you want to go back and eliminate one section of the document, you can click the trash button here. And so one of the many indicators we're going to put on here is the teacher. We need to have space for the teacher to indicate who they are by last name. And so all I need to do in the question title is put in teacher, because that again will be the title of this section. I don't really need any help text here because again, teacher's just going to put in their last name. And then once I click on this drop-down menu under question type, you'll see that there are several options. The first option is just text, and what this will do is allow us to have a very, very small space, just like this, for teachers to indicate their name. We are going to be using most of these options throughout this, but for the first couple of them, we just want to select a text box. And then finally, you'll see that there's a space to make this a required question. In most of the cases on this document, this one included, we do want to make this a required question because we do not want anyone to be able to submit a form without indicating each section of the document has been filled out. And so once we're done with this section, we've put in the question title as teacher, we've created a text box, we go ahead and push done. And what you'll see is just this, a little box that pops up with space for a teacher to put their last name. Now I need to create several new areas that will be filtered down through this document, so what I'm going to do is scroll over this section and come on over to the right, and you'll see my two options. We'll click on the duplicate button, and what this will do is just create a mirror image of what you just did. except in this case we want to create a new section. So under question title, we've already got the teacher name. Now we need to indicate the course in which the student is enrolled for that teacher. And again, we don't need a whole lot of space here, so a text box will suffice. We do want to make this required. We'll push done, and now I have space for the student to have their course indicated by the teacher, whether or not they're the world history teacher, the geometry teacher, the English teacher, whatever that might be. Same process, I need to create a new indicator, so I'm going to come on over to the right. I'm going to duplicate once again, and now we're getting to a section where the teacher needs to be able to go through and elaborate on what the assignment or the task was for the student in which the accommodation was offered. So what I want to do is put in assignment or task description under question title. I don't need any help text. And in this case, I want to give the teacher more than a little space to write. So what I'm going to do rather than a text box is create a paragraph text box. And you'll notice right away that there is more space for the teacher to be able to put notes in. And again, this is something where the teacher can put in, French Revolution worksheet or geometry, math, homework assignment, whatever that might be that the teacher gave the student to do where they needed an accommodation. We can go ahead and put that in this section. And again, we do want to make this a required question before we push done. So now you'll see I have the first three indicators set up. I have the teacher, I have the course, and I have space for the teacher to indicate what happened on that assignment. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that. The next section, again, this will be the implementation notes. So now this is space for the teacher who's already indicated the actual assignment or task to now elaborate on what was done for that student according to their IEP. So I want to leave this as paragraph text. I want to make absolutely certain that I have enough room for the teacher to elaborate here on what was actually done for that student. I do want to make this required, and I do want to push done. So we're about halfway through the document. Now this next part, again, I'm going to go through the same process. I need a new section. I'm going to go ahead and push duplicate. And now is the part where we need to start referencing the FAPE form in the IEP document to indicate the accommodations available to that student. So what I'm going to do under question title is I'm going to go ahead and indicate the title of this section as accommodation per IEP. And again, it could be accommodations per 504 if the student has a 504 plan, but in this case we'll say that the student has an IEP. I do not want paragraph text here. What I need to do now is create columns and rows for the student's IEP accommodations to be listed as effective or not effective. And so the option I'm going to pick for this section is going to be a grid, the very last one on the drop-down menu. So once I click grid, you'll see several options pop up, and I'm going to go through these one by one. Under columns here, these are going to be the vertical rows that you're going to create. So what I'd like to do under columns is just narrow that down to 2 columns. Because again, all we need to do is indicate whether or not the accommodations were effective, or under the second column, not effective. And so again, please do that and pause if you need to go back and look at this section. But again, under columns, you only need 2. Label them as effective or not effective. Now under the rows, this is the portion where I will now go through and be listing the accommodations per the IEP. And so again, some students have just a few, some students have many. Each time I need to add a new one, I can do so. So I'll put in about 3 or 4 of these just for demonstration purposes, but again, you do not want to go through and list anything that's not on the IEP document itself. And so for this student, I'm going to put that one of their accommodations is break reading into parts. That's the first one. I want to add a second one. So you'll see this little section here that says click to add. I'll click that, and it will open up space for me to continue to add accommodations. So the next one, I'll go ahead and put in preview, text, vocabulary, and concepts. I'll add just a couple more. So again, I'll repeat this process. I'll click to add another. One of the other accommodations is test retakes. And then finally, I'll put in one more for this student, just assuming they only have 4 accommodations. Use notes on tests. And again, you can keep going through this process. So if a student has 10 or 15 accommodations listed, again, you can continue. There's no limit on how many of these you can add. And yes, you absolutely want to make this a required question because this is the most important part of the document where teachers need to indicate whether or not the accommodations were effective and what the accommodations are themselves. Now, once I push done, you'll notice I've got a very clean chart here now with 2 columns, effective, not effective, and on the left side here on the rows you'll see each of the accommodations as was documented by myself. So that's it. I mean, this is really the most important part of the document. Now there are still a few more sections we want to go ahead and add. One of them being the actual score or the grade. So I want to again duplicate, and in this case I only want to create a text box because I don't need very much space. And under question title I'll go ahead and put in grade or score. Now this is the part where the teacher can actually indicate, if applicable, the actual point value or the grade given or the pass no pass status of any kind of assignment that was given to a student with an IEP in which the accommodation was offered. I do not want to make this a required question, so I want to uncheck this box. And the reason for that is some accommodations are not necessarily paired up with actual assignments. And so, if I go through and force a teacher to answer this question by putting in a 0 or some sort of arbitrary score that doesn't really apply, it will skew my data. So I want to again make this not a required question, and I want to push done. And so I will see grade or score. We've got just 2 more sections to add. So again, I want to duplicate, scroll on down, and what I need here are space for the teacher to talk about the impact of the accommodation for that student. So I want to label this as impact notes. And I do want to leave significant space in a paragraph text box for the teacher to answer this. And I do obviously also want to make this a required question. What will go in here is space for the teacher to actually indicate whether or not the accommodation was effectively implemented, and they will elaborate on that here with their own anecdotal data and their own notes. But again, we want to make sure that the teachers know that this is space for them to now go through and not just talk about what was done, but how effective it was or not effective. Finally, the last section I want to create after duplicating one more is space for the teacher to indicate whether or not a work sample was provided to the RST. And so I'm going to label the question title as work sample. I'm going to come down to my drop-down menu, and in this case I'm going to pick a multiple choice option because there are 3 choices I want the teacher to have. The first being available and provided to RST. And again, if a teacher clicked this option, it means yes, I have already scanned or copied or emailed or provided a hard copy to the RST a work sample of whatever was given as evidence for this accommodation. The second option would be not available. Perhaps the assignment was given back to the student and a copy was never made. And then finally a third option, not applicable. And this would be in the case of a general accommodation in which there is no work sample available in the first place. I do also want to make this a required question. I want to push done. And now my form is complete. So what I'm looking at here, just to make sure we're all on the same page, I have the student's name indicated at the top, first name, last initial. I have the preferred modality. I have a text box with the space for the teacher to put their name in there. I have a text box for a teacher to put in the course in which they are teaching that student. And I have 2 paragraph boxes, one to indicate the assignment or the task that was given, and one to indicate space for the clarification of the implementation of that task. And then the most important part is the accommodations, in which I have 2 columns and several rows indicating the effectiveness of each of the accommodations themselves. I have a text box for the grade or score. I have a paragraph text box for impact notes, and I have a multiple choice set of options to indicate the status of the work sample. So my form has been created. Now what I have to do here is decide how I want this form to look, and in this case, if you notice in the top left, it'll say theme plain. We want to go ahead and leave that alone. You can click on theme. It'll give you several options to make the form look pretty. You can put green or purple backgrounds. You can put polka dots on there. You can put a matrix theme on there. We don't want to do that because again, this form is something that we want to transfer from grade to grade to follow that student, and so we don't want teachers customizing every year to change the form and alter the data. So again, we're done now. We want to make sure that we go ahead and save our form. It should be automatically saving as you go and work on it, but again, we'll push save just in case. And then once that form has saved, what you'll want to do now is come on back up to the top, go over to your Google Docs tablet, and what you will see is your library has now added the document that you just created, Jane Doe. So if I want to go ahead and see the form as the teacher would see it, make sure that it's been created properly, I'm going to go ahead and click on that form, and the first thing that will pop up is a chart. Okay, and now this chart is going to be where all the data that will eventually be entered for the student will be stored. So this is not something that you as an RST or as a teacher or as an administrator have to manage. However, this is a great place to look for the data as it appears. Now, what I want to do first though is check the form. So I'm going to come on up to this little toolbar and I'm going to click on the form button.